Well, good morning, everybody. It's amazing. This is a huge room. A lot of people. Thank you for coming. This is incredible. So I'm going to pack a lot into the next 90 minutes. So you ready for a bit of an exciting universal design, multimedia roller coaster ride of sorts? All right, so first of all, thank you so much to the Indiana IEP Resource Center. I know how much work, I can't even imagine how much work goes into a conference like this. They've been incredibly organized. Jolly and Marcy and the whole team have been amazing. So thank you for all the incredible work to pull this off. So when I think about a presentation like this, first of all, I think, well, how am I going to engage 750 people or 800 people for 90 minutes? And I'm really lucky in that I have this profession where I get to make films, documentary films. And I believe, I'm biased of course, but I believe that film is one of the most accessible mediums. And actually when I went from being a photojournalist to a filmmaker, it was in part because I really wanted to reach young people. And if you have young people in your lives, which most of you do one way or another, you know that video is almost like the currency of communication these days, right? When I speak to schools especially, I say, how many of you have watched a video at some point today? 100% of the room raises their hand. So I'm going to be doing some talking, doing some video presentations. I'm going to get to show you the first time ever a screening of my new film, one of my new films, first time it's ever been shown here in Indiana. And I'm going to show you a trailer of the Intelligent Lives film. And then we're not going to have a lot of time today for back and forth discussion during the morning keynote because it's such a big crowd and I have a lot to present. But I'm doing breakouts for the next 2 days, and I'm really looking forward to having time to sit with many of you and talk with you and have lots of interactions during the breakouts and during lunch. So let me start with asking you guys to play along with me for a minute. And I'm going to ask you to do a time travel experiment. So close your eyes just for a minute. Don't fall asleep on me, but close your eyes, all right? Everybody get their eyes closed. Now what I want you to do is picture yourself back in a classroom from some time in your childhood, somewhere from kindergarten through high school. Think of a classroom that you can kind of visualize, that you have a strong memory of, and look around the room and think about what you see in that room. Visualize what you see, especially your peers, and what they're doing, what they look like, etc., how they're acting. All right, open your eyes. Now, how many of you, when you went back to that classroom, saw a classroom in which peers with and without disabilities were interacting together, learning together, working together? Just raise your hand if that was your experiences growing up. 1, 2, all right. I see maybe 12 or 13 hands in a room of 800. How many of you were in a friendship in which there was a kid with a disability and without a disability and a close friendship growing up? All right, a few more. How many of you were in like a romantic relationship in which there was a person with a disability and without a disability? Maybe we'll stick with high school just to be safe here. In that relationship, a person with a disability and without in a romantic relationship. I don't really see, maybe a few people. Okay, so the point of that story and the point of that exercise is to say I was just in very much the same situation. When I grew up, disability was not on my radar screen, as you just exemplified was the case for most of you. Unless you're a person with a disability, then it was very much a part of your experience. But I didn't have a disability growing up, and when I was 4, I went to this preschool, and there was this really awesome kid there named Richard. And I loved hanging out with Richard because he was like the one kid that didn't mind carrying rocks back and forth across the playground with us together. That's what boys do, right, when they're 4, just for no apparent reason. So Richard and I would do this, and it was really fun. Richard had a good sense of humor. I just remember him really clearly. But I also remember that Richard had this big difference that was readily apparent to me. Can anybody see what the difference might be? Right, he's got this band across his head. And it was, as much as I just liked Richard as a kid, he was also like the kid with the headband. And what was up with Richard? Like, why did Richard have to wear this headband? And I was a little, I'm 52 now. This was 48 years ago, and I remember it really clearly that Richard was the kid with the headband. So I remember asking my mom once, like, what's the deal with Richard? Why does he have to wear this headband? And she said, well, Richard's had a lot of ear issues and surgeries, and he has to wear that to protect himself, probably from all the dust we were creating while carrying those rocks across the playground. So that answered my 4-year-old curiosity, but the fact that it's still so evident to me is really telling, that was a big difference in this kid. Now, growing up, going to college, I went to University of Michigan, another Big Ten school like Indiana, and throughout college, I do not remember disability being part of our discussions at all. I was involved in social justice movements around anti-racism. Back then, there was a big anti-apartheid movement that I got involved in. I was a journalist. But disability rights didn't ever cross my awareness at all. As time went on and I met my wife Betsy when we were in our early 20s, we had Isaiah, our first son. He's actually 21 now. That was the only part of the bio that's a little out of date. I have 21 and 18-year-old are my boys. But Isaiah was like very precocious. He was the kid that was always one step ahead of the curve, right? He literally said his first word and took his first step the same 10 months, the same day, which is pretty early if you know child development. So he was always the one like pushing the boundaries and one step ahead. So when my wife Betsy became pregnant and we were expecting our second child, we kind of expected the same thing. You know, and you also start, I have two siblings, a younger brother and an older sister, and I just remember all the amazing things we did together, you know, hiking and climbing and just having all this fun and going on bike rides together and lots of adventures. My parents took us to national parks all over the country and did camping. And so I just got really excited for Isaiah to have a sibling. So when Samuel was born, and we knew it was a boy once he was born, right, very cute, it was just so blissful. We had, you know, I remember the moment he was born and realizing he was a boy, and my wife and I were like, all right, good, we know how to do boys, this is good. Girl might have been a little more, freaked me out a little more, the whole challenge of that. But we had the second boy, and I just, again, had all these wonderful visions, you know, of these guys growing up together. And that sense of kind of blissful innocence lasted probably about 3 months or so. Because at about 3 or 4 months, we realized that Samuel was not hitting any of these milestones that Isaiah had hit so early. He wasn't, you know, at 3 or 4 months, he wasn't trying to roll over. He wasn't even making any attempts to sit up. He wasn't babbling in typical ways like you do when you're that age. So we got a little concerned, and what would you do? What have you done in that situation? What do you think? Right, call the doctor, call the pediatrician, and he's great. He's still our pediatrician to this day. And he said, you know, Dan and Betsy, kids develop in all different ways, all different paces. It's probably nothing to be concerned about. But, you know, just to be sure, why don't we bring in early intervention and have them, you know, just do an assessment. So I remember so clearly sitting in our living room and watching these 5 very pleasant, smiling young women, you know, social work, I think it was like OT, PT, speech, you know, developmental pediatrician, just ask us all these questions about, well, is he trying to roll over? Nope, not really. This is probably 5 months into his life. Is he sitting up? Nope. Is he babbling much? Not really. And I remember them saying at one point, well, when you lift him up under his armpits, do his armpits just kind of shrug up like this, or do they hold firm? I was like, well, they hold firm. And they're like, good. And I'm like, I got one right, thank goodness. But I did feel like I was taking this test that I was just failing miserably. And it was the highest stakes test you could ever imagine, you know, about the health of your child. So that was not very reassuring. I mean, they were great, they were very professional, but Betsy and I left just knowing that our fears were somewhat confirmed by their responses. And they said at the end, you know, maybe just to be sure, we should have him see a neurologist. I really don't like those words, just to be sure, anymore. It's like a sign that something bad is about to happen. But we did see a neurologist, and he's a neurologist that we no longer see for reasons that'll probably become pretty self-evident. Anyway, he did the right things. It was about 7 or 8 months at this point, and he started taking all these samples of Samuel, his skin, his blood, his urine, and shipping these samples up all over the world to labs that test the metabolic process and are looking for certain types of disabilities, disorders, et cetera. And about 2 months later, so Samuel was probably about 11 months old at this point, I got a call from this neurologist. And he said, Mr. Habib, it looks like from one of the lab results that your son might have a mitochondrial disorder. Why don't you come in a couple weeks and we'll talk it through and figure out a plan. So it had been a long time since I had taken high school biology, and I had no idea what a mitochondrial disorder was, so what do you think I did at that point? Right, Google mitochondrial disorder. And once again, it's one of these moments, like I'm sure all of you have, where you can just put yourself back there in a flash. I was sitting at my computer, and I type in Google mitochondrial disorder, and up on the screen and all those keywords that pop up, the first thing that jumped out at me was usually fatal. And you know, so even just saying that, it kind of makes me a little bit nauseous. And I just felt like I'd been kicked by a horse in the stomach. And I'll tell you that I thankfully now know that there are thousands of kinds of mitochondrial disorders. They have all different kinds of repercussions. In Samuel's case, it's not deemed to be a fatal illness, but it's a significant issue, and it caused cerebral palsy for Samuel. And so now when I look at this picture, does anybody notice something with that information that's a little bit different in the picture? Anybody see anything? Right, I see some people that his hands were balled up. And now I know that that was the early sign of cerebral palsy, that we just didn't realize it. He had this real tight tone in his hands. So we went from, this blissful experience of just having these two boys and having this perfectly normal life to complete and utter uncertainty. And lots of hospitalizations and lots of lab work and a lot of fragile health issues that Samuel started experiencing because we didn't have the right meds or supplements or anything. And we wondered, what is this going to be like for Samuel? How can he possibly go to school with his peers when he can't walk or he can't hold a pencil, or how's he ever going to be with his friends outside when he can't get out the door on his own? We had a house that was completely inaccessible physically. There was no way. And we didn't know at that point, is he ever going to walk? Is he ever going to talk? Is he ever going to, be able to stand? We knew none of this information, just complete uncertainty. And Betsy and I realized we had to find a way to live that wasn't all about fear and uncertainty. So thankfully, we both did a program. Do you have partners in policy making? I think you do here in maybe through the ARC or another organization. Or the DD Council, I believe, in Indiana runs Partners in Policy Making, if I'm not mistaken. And anyway, it's this great program for families and self-advocates to figure out how to navigate the world of education, healthcare, legal issues that come up around disability. And it was like a boot camp for disability advocacy. But the biggest thing that came out of it for Betsy and I was we started having this vision for Samuel that was different than just fear and uncertainty. And the biggest vision that we both came to was that we wanted Samuel to feel like he belonged. We wanted him to feel like he belonged. And we wanted him to feel like he belonged in our family, in our immediate family, in our extended family, in our neighborhood, in our community, and most certainly in his own local school. Because we couldn't imagine a scenario in which Samuel felt like he belonged in our community if he didn't feel like he belonged at the school that was a quarter mile from our house where all of his friends were going. So thankfully, Samuel never has any self-doubt. He's like the most confident kid I've ever met. And he's a dreamer, and he's got lots of visions, and he plans our vacations like 2 years in advance. We're going to spring training to see the Red Sox in a couple weeks because that's been on Samuel's bucket list for a couple years, and we're going to make it happen. Anyway, he's a dreamer, and he's a visionary, and he and Isaiah have been very close. He's also a charmer. So when it came to preschool, there was no doubt that Samuel felt like he belonged. He would just bat those eyelashes at the girl next to him, and yeah, he totally belonged. When it came to elementary school, he made friends. He had an incredible circle of friends who supported him, sometimes quite literally, like for this group photo on either side, holding him up. And he certainly felt like he belonged. And he went to a public elementary school. And he had a teacher who's incredible, Barbara O'Brien, who's a big part of my film, including Samuel, that I'll talk a little more about. And she taught a multi-age classroom, a K-1-2 multi-age classroom. And he felt like he belonged, even though at this point he's still not able to speak. He's using communication technology. He's using a wheelchair. So because he was in class with these kids all day long, and they saw him using his communication device, they saw him struggling to speak, but learning to understand what he was saying because he used a wheelchair. When he went to things outside of school, like the Boy Scouts, he totally felt like he belonged. He would roll in, he'd do the national anthem on his device, he would contribute during his device. How many of you have been involved in Scouts, and especially Boy Scouts, in any capacity? So you guys know about the Pinewood Derby, those little cars that you carve? So that was why Samuel got into Boy Scouts. It was all about the Pinewood Derby. And it was all about winning the Pinewood Derby, by the way, which puts a lot of pressure on the dads or the moms who are helping build those cars, I gotta say. But anyway, we got past that. We did okay in the Pinewood Derby. But his scout leader was great. And his scout leader, had all different kinds of kids with physical disabilities, emotional disabilities, no disabilities, just a very mixed group. And his scout leader said, Samuel, you could be an Eagle Scout. We could help you get there. But as soon as the Pinewood Derby was over, Sam's like, I'm done. That was really the only reason I did Scouts. But he found other passions. He found theater in elementary school. And so again, once he was up on that stage, he used his communication device. And that's how he said his lines. And nobody batted an eye because that's what he was like all day long. And Samuel felt like he belonged. Baseball, sports is a big part of our life. It always has been for both my boys and myself. And so he wanted to play baseball. And during the early years, T-ball, or some of you have probably been involved as coaches or spectators, it's pretty much like herding cats. That's what it is, right? It's just like kids are going up the third baseline, across the field, running into each other. The least of anybody's concerns is a kid in a wheelchair, right? It was like... But then, as Samuel got older, he wanted to keep playing, even at the level where kids were starting to throw the ball fast and hit line drives and be very competitive. So anyway, I remember one game where it was one of these games where you were out or you were safe. It wasn't like everybody was safe. And Samuel was at that point hitting off a tee, even though the other kids were hitting off a batted ball. And again, they just knew Samuel did things a little differently, so nobody batted an eye. But he got up there, and he really wanted to be safe. And his brother Isaiah, who was probably 10 at the time, Samuel was 7, and Isaiah's friend Nick, both very big, strong, good athletes, they wanted to help Samuel get up the first baseline extremely fast in his wheelchair. And so they got on either side of the chair, and Samuel hits that perfect little dribble up the third base line, perfect placement, because most 7-year-olds are not going to be able to throw the ball accurately from third base to first base. So they get ready to go, and they just start pushing his chair so hard, but they forgot to take the brakes off. So if you can see that chair, luckily it's got those little tip guard wheels in front. And so Samuel almost did a face plant, thankfully did not. He was out by a mile once they figured out what had happened, and so they were so annoyed. So the second time up, they take the brakes off, he hits another dribbler, they go up the first baseline as fast as they could, but he was still out by like a foot or two. And they were all frustrated, and Samuel's kind of laughing, but the older boys are really pissed, and they're competitive, and they want him to be safe. So the third time they get up there, they take the brakes off, take a deep breath, Samuel hits the ball. It was like a Roadrunner cartoon with just dust flying everywhere, like a big cloud of dust going up the first baseline. I've never seen a wheelchair then or before or since move as fast as this chair. But the problem was that the first baseman was completely ignoring the baseball game. He was like looking up at airplanes, picking flowers out of the ground, probably not a kid that played baseball for much longer. And they were about to kill this kid. I mean, it was this locomotive going up the first baseline, about to plow him over. And thankfully, my neighbor Dave, who was coaching first base, saw this major calamity about to happen and picks the kid up and pulls it out of the way. They go through, everybody's safe, and they're happy. So Samuel continued to play right up through Little League. He was the first kid who used kind of a wheelchair. He ended up using a adaptive bicycle at that point. His coach, Doug, got him up the first baseline as fast as he could. Sometimes he was safe, sometimes he was out. He got the game ball a couple times, but he felt like he belonged on that baseball field. So jumping ahead now, Samuel is a senior in high school. His brother Isaiah is 21. He's in college at Prescott College in Arizona studying adventure education. He's actually in the Grand Canyon right now on a river rafting trip for 25 days, which is awesome. But Samuel's a senior in high school. And I'm really proud of Samuel. He's been in general education his whole life. Again, even though he has trouble speaking, he uses a communication device. He's got some learning challenges. He's got a lot of learning strengths. He's involved in a lot of extracurricular activities. Do you have unified sports here in Indiana? I see a few heads nodding. I love unified sports. It was started by the Special Olympics as an endeavor to create teams in high school and middle school where you've got kids with and without disabilities competing against other schools of kids with and without disabilities. So it's a wonderful, inclusive sports model that's taking off around the country. I'm a big supporter. Samuel does track, soccer, and basketball, and tends to pick the cutest girl to team up with to throw the shot put when that time comes. He's also on the yearbook club. He does broadcasting. He does the New England Patriots or Red Sox report every Friday on the live TV station that broadcasts. He uses his communication device to do that broadcast. He's had a lot to talk about this year with the Patriots, but I won't rub that in. And he's part of a really wonderful group called the Be the Change Club, which is a multicultural club that welcomes new Americans into the country. You'll see a little bit of this represented in the film I'm going to show in a bit, but we've had a tremendous amount of refugee resettlement in New Hampshire, which is, of course, challenging for the schools around English language learning, but also has been beautiful and has really diversified the community. Samuel also is developing some wonderful leadership skills. He now takes a leadership role in his IEP. And I'm doing a couple breakouts later today, just talking about the whole IEP process and how one of the elements of it is that Samuel takes a leadership role through his own IEP meetings. So this is a pretty big group. It's a lot of SLPs and PT, OT, special education, all his general ed teachers. This is one of the bigger gatherings we were able to pull together. But we meet regularly, like every month and a half or so. We get together as a team and we have these check-ins, and Samuel has a PowerPoint that you can maybe see on his right. He's got a little yellow button, and he paces the meeting. He works on the PowerPoint ahead of time with his special ed coordinator, and it's amazing how much more engaged he's been in his IEP meetings since he's had this leadership role. It's like night and day. And even though he's been going to his IEP since he was in kindergarten. So anyway, I'll talk more about that during the breakout, but it's really great. I mean, running a meeting is a really important skill, right, as a professional in terms of your adult life, so it's a really great skill to develop. So he's very, as I mentioned, he's very into multimedia production. We got to go to Syracuse last year, and he got a tour of the Syracuse TV station. So he's thinking a lot about being a multimedia storyteller and film work as an adult and as a professional. And he's also become a real strong disability rights advocate. He advocated for his access during the high school basketball games. Because if you know most high school gyms and games, the kids all like to sit up high in the bleachers, right, and talk and look at their phones and chat and whatever. And that meant that Samuel couldn't sit with any of his friends. So he worked with the basketball team to lobby the athletic director and the principal to move the student section down to the front. Because the basketball team said, you know, that would be better for us too. We would be able to feed off the energy of our peers right near the floor instead of them kind of checking out up at the top of the bleachers. So he advocated for that, and now he's working on the football stands, which is going to be a little more challenging. So Samuel's doing all these great things, and for him the goal is a diploma, a regular high school diploma. It's always been the goal. Almost every decision we've made in his education has been with that in mind, that Sam would always be working towards a regular high school diploma, and it's certainly informed a lot of our decisions. And it's also meant that now when he thinks about college, because of the friends that are around him that are all planning for college, because of his brother who's going to college, it's never a question of, can I go to college? Will I ever go to college? It's, I don't know where I want to go to college. And college may look different for Samuel than it will for his brother. You know, we can't just ship Samuel off for 4 years out west. He's going to probably start slowly with community college, and you know, we have a whole transition plan that again I'll talk about more during the breakout. But the fact that that's his goal is wonderful, and I'm so proud of him and so excited that he's worked so hard to achieve that. But Samuel is representative of what we know about inclusive education. And this is kind of where I want you guys to understand this is not just a personal story. This is also a story based on the research and the information I've been able to obtain, and many of you in the room know that included kids are more likely to have better communication skills, higher academic achievement, wider social networks, fewer behavior problems, more opportunities for higher education, and more meaningful employment as adults. I mean, that is 30 years of research. It's irrefutable. I mean, there's you know, the data is kind of cited below, but I could cite you study after study after study, and I've never, ever, ever seen a study that has shown that kids who are segregated in separate environments have better outcomes in any of these areas. I've never seen a study like that. So I think that data is really important. But there's also another anecdotal story I want to share, which puts that data into even more of a human context. And that is about a boy named Todd, who I got to know when I was doing photojournalism. I did a photo story in 1991, so quite a long time ago, on one of the first schools in New Hampshire that was doing this thing called mainstreaming. And if you remember, that's what this used to be called, right? Where you would have kids with disabilities spending a little bit of time in the general ed classroom as this kind of experiment. So Todd was being mainstreamed. He was a kid not that different from Samuel, although he was completely nonverbal. At that time, there was no communication system that they could match up for him, but this was, 1991, a long time ago. Used a wheelchair, had cerebral palsy. So in elementary school, Todd was really thriving. He had time in these general ed classrooms. He seemed very engaged, very positive, really happy, was making great friendships, like with this boy Scott. They became good friends. And it was going great. But then in middle school, there was a different philosophy, quote unquote, in the middle school. They weren't doing mainstreaming, nor at the high school. So at that point, Todd started being completely segregated. And, not to overgeneralize, but I think that in some of those environments where he was just with kids with significant disabilities, there wasn't the same level of discourse and high expectations. I'm not casting aspersions on anybody that works in that environment. I know you're doing everything you can to benefit these kids. But again, I think research and lots of data suggests that you don't have the same level of academic rigor in some of these segregated environments. And that was Todd's experience. And people started talking down to him like he was a 5 or 6 year old, even when he was in high school. And so he didn't have a great education beyond elementary school. And as a result, or at least partially as a result, he's not working. We ended up living next to Todd for 10 years, just coincidentally, as neighbors. And we know his family very well. And so Todd, doesn't have a robust community these days. He doesn't have any employment. And so finally, when Todd was in his early 20s, a few years ago, they did access to some communication technology that allowed him to share his feelings. And you know what the very first thing he typed was? That. F you, but the asterisks weren't there. It was spelled out. And then he went on to say, and I know it is funny and I laugh, and it's also really heartbreaking because what he went on to say was he was so mad at being denied an education. And he felt so isolated and lonely after all these years. And Todd, to me, embodies this idea that we call least dangerous assumption. Maybe some of you have heard that phrase. And that is that the least dangerous assumption we can make about someone is that they are competent, that they're competent, right? We need to presume competence in everybody. And the fact that people just presumed that Todd was incompetent was what resulted in him being denied a real education and has really affected his adult life. So, unfortunately, Todd is probably more representative of America still than Samuel, in that if you look particularly at the population of kids with intellectual disabilities, 56% of kids with intellectual disabilities still spend the majority of their day segregated in special ed environments. And only 17% are truly included by the federal threshold of spending 80% of their time in general ed environments. And that's why I did this whole film, Intelligent Lives, which I'll show you a trailer from towards the end of this keynote. So why do we do it? Why do we continue to systematically segregate so many kids throughout the country? And New Hampshire has similar issues. I mean, I'm not saying New Hampshire is perfect either. Everywhere I go, many, many kids are being segregated. Why do we do it if we know the data would support a different way? So I think, as I think about this work that I do, I think maybe it can't just be about Samuel or Todd. Maybe we have to look at this as something that benefits kids without disabilities, as much or more than kids with disabilities. So as I've kind of looked into this topic, I found a study by a researcher named Eric Carter, who's at Vanderbilt University. And it may be a little hard from afar to see this, so I'll explain what the chart means. Eric did this series of studies where he looked at different groups of kids preparing for the same exams. And what he did is he did these parallel groups. In one group, it was just kids without disabilities studying for this exam. So quote unquote typical kids working together preparing for these exams. The other group was a hybrid group of kids with and without disabilities preparing for the same exam, right? So you had one that was like a more mixed group, more inclusive, one that was more monolithic. And he did this again and again with different groups of kids. And the average outcome was that the hybrid groups, in those hybrid groups, the kids without disabilities were scoring an average of 15 points higher on the exam. So the typical kids were far outperforming their peers when they were in that inclusive group. And they did some qualitative studies and why was this happening, and they found that the kids who were in that mixed group told them, well, I really wanted to learn this stuff so that we could talk about it and so that I could help explain it to my friend John who has this disability, and I was kind of reteaching it, and I was, the kids were just much more engaged. They were doing some reteaching. They were taking the work more seriously. And what happens as teachers, when kids are engaged, when they're taking the work seriously, when they're reteaching, they're going to learn the information better. And I see that happening all the time in Samuel's classroom. I hear that from teachers all the time, that they become better teachers and that it becomes a healthier and more engaging classroom environment for them. So that's part of it, is the academic outcomes. But I think there's also a really important discussion around the social and emotional outcomes, because when I think about when I was a kid, walking to school was as important to me as school itself. Just the games we played, the things we talked about, the things we caught up on. I remember sometimes that more than I remember school itself. So I used to walk to school with Samuel every day, and it was just so fun to hear the kids talk about whatever was on their mind and just play games. So let me ask you guys a question, a quick survey of the room. When you think about who you are as a person today, not just your professional self, but your whole personhood, and then you think about your school experience, especially K through 12, if you think about both the academic experience of school and the social and emotional experience of school, which of those two things had a bigger impact on who you are as a person? And when I say who you are as a person, think about the people that you choose to hang out with, the person you chose to be with as a partner or not be with as a partner, the books you read, the movies you stream on Netflix, whatever it is. Which had a bigger impact on you? Was it the academic experience of school or the social and emotional? So quick survey of the room. How many, and there's no wrong answer, be honest. How many of you would say the academic experience had a bigger impact on who you are as a person? Okay, great, I see some hands. How many of you would say the social and emotional had bigger? Right, but how do you all feel as educators you're being measured? Is it by the social and emotional growth of your kids? Probably not, probably not. So there's some big policy issues here, right? And to be truthful, I think there has been some progress made. Every Student Succeeds Act, which replace No Child Left Behind. There are measures in there for schools in terms of implementation of things like MTSS and positive behavioral supports and things that support the social and emotional health of kids. Schools can show their performance in part by that. It's still disproportionately academic, but I think there's some progress there, just to give credit. But kind of to wrap up this part of the presentation, I want to tell one last story before I show a film. So, and this has kind of brought it all together for me. Everything I've talked about so far came together in this trip we took to Cooperstown. Has anyone been to the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York? A few people, great. It was really awesome. You know, we're big baseball fans. Samuel took two of his buddies he's been friends with since elementary school, Fletcher and Jacob, and we took a road trip a few hours away. And the Hall of Fame was great. It was very accessible. You know, we can get anywhere. Samuel lingered at those Red Sox championship rings for quite a while, just soaking it in. And then it was time to go have lunch in the community. And we went out to Main Street in Cooperstown. And can anyone notice any impediments or obstacles we might have faced? Right, in front of almost every single building, there was at least one curb or step. And if you're in a 500-pound wheelchair, like Samuel is, a power wheelchair, this is like the Berlin Wall. I mean, you're not getting over a 4-inch step. And so it took us about 45 minutes just to find a place to have lunch. And his friends were pissed and shocked, and they just couldn't believe that it was so hard to have lunch. They'd never had this experience. And so, yeah, put a little bit of a damper on the trip, actually. So anyway, we got back, and these same guys were over a couple weeks later, and they said, you know, we should write a letter to Cooperstown and complain about that. That was really wrong. So I was like, go for it. Sounds good to me. I'll be your scribe, and you write. So they wrote this letter, and some of the highlights of the letter were, we are very mad because almost all the stores in downtown Cooperstown are not accessible to someone in a wheelchair. We had $100 to spend, and we had a rule. If Samuel couldn't get into the store, then none of us would buy anything from it. We hope that this letter will change downtown Cooperstown before anyone else has to struggle with what we did. And I think I put my cell on the letter. I did put stamps on it, I'll be honest about that, and mailed it. And they mailed it to the Chamber of Commerce and all the local newspapers. And it got published in the letters. The letters got published in the paper. And I got a call from the Chamber of Commerce soon after. And they said, oh, Mr. Habib, it was so great of you and your son and his friends to write this letter. You know, is there anything we can do to make Cooperstown more accessible? And I'm like, ramps? Ever heard of ramps? But I didn't say that. I'm thinking that. And I blah, blah, blah. I said something about, well, really, these storefronts wouldn't be that difficult to make accessible, and most of them just had one step, and blah, blah, blah. And she was very receptive, but I was like, yeah, that's going to really make a difference. But about a year after that, one of my friends who has family in Cooperstown said, Dan, you wouldn't believe it. I went home, and they've totally redone downtown Cooperstown, and they've rebuilt the sidewalks so that almost all the storefronts are accessible. And of course, I wanted to say it was all because of the letter, and it wasn't. I mean, it may have had a little impact. I'm sure this was in their master plan or something, but it might have put a little extra pressure on them. But I think the more important piece is that think of the lesson that it taught Fletcher and Jacob and Samuel about civil rights, about human rights, about standing up for your friend, about advocacy, about justice. I mean, those are lessons that will be with them their whole lives. And, I get the chills just thinking about it because, that's, I think, the most profound experience I could share to show the benefits of inclusive education for both Samuel, but also particularly for his friends without disabilities. To see the world as this diverse place. So I think about Samuel, and I think about the importance to his friends and our community and our family of inclusion, but I also think about our future as a country and as a state of Indiana and New Hampshire, and I think about, it's about sons and daughters to come, and nieces and nephews and grandchildren that aren't even here yet. What kind of world do we want them to live in? Do we want them to live in a world where disability continues to be seen as something that needs to be avoided, as, Richard, the kid with the headband, and how weird that is? Or do we want them to see disability like so many of Samuel's peers see it as just like a natural part of our diversity? That this is life, and it will always be part of our life and diversity. And I hope that's the message that I think could potentially be the most persuasive to the naysayers, to people that resist the whole movement that you're a part of by being here at this conference. So, what does it take to create a culture of inclusion? And I think largely it is about hearts and minds. It is about a hearts and minds change. Certainly it's about the effective practices in education, and you're going to be hearing that from me and many other presenters over the course of these 2 days. What does it take to actually implement this in schools? And that is so critical to know those things. But if you don't have your heart and mind and soul behind this, I mean, it's hard work, right? I don't have to tell you that. It's really hard work to do this well. And if you don't have your heart and mind behind it, you're not going to survive. It's not going to last. And it's not going to become irreversible change where we can look back on this in 30 years or 20 years or 10 years or sooner, hopefully, and say, what were we thinking? Why were we systematically segregating such a huge proportion of our population? Just like we do now around gender, right? Around segregation by gender or by race, ethnicity, sexual orientation. So I did the film including Samuel. I'm not going to be showing that today, but hopefully some of you have seen it. And it's a film that, to me, is the best possible attempt I could give to show a full throttle hearts and minds vision about why we have to do inclusive education, told through the Samuel story and the stories of several other people. And you can go to the website and watch a trailer and learn more about that film. But I want to show a film that's brand new. And it's a film that I had worked on for a while. I don't want to tell you too much about it because it'll spoil some of the pieces of the film that I want you to experience on your own. But it has to do with Samuel and his principal, who had this interaction one day at a homecoming parade that was very profound for me. And it led me to take on this project that I really hadn't even been planning to take on. So I made this film that I'm going to show you now, and again, I'm really excited to share it because it's the first time it's been shown. I haven't shown this film publicly very much at all, so you're really one of the first big groups to see it. And to me, Mr. Connolly really embodies a hearts and minds story about why inclusion in so many different capacities is the only direction that we should be going in as a country and as a world. So if you could dim the lights a little bit, we'll watch the film and then talk a little bit.
And welcome to the Concord High School Class of 2012 graduation exercises. You should be proud of what you accomplished at Concord High. I salute you and ask that our audience do the same.
Concord High Principal Gene Connolly, known for his legendary energy. The guy never stopped moving. He was all over the school, and he seemed to be at every sporting event, every community gathering. He wasn't afraid to get goofy alongside kids, whenever he had an excuse to do so. And I swear he knew every one of the 1,600 students in the school personally. Connolly had been principal at Concord High for 14 years, and he wanted to lead the school for at least another decade. When my son Samuel was around 7 years old, I made a film about how he was being included at our local elementary school in Concord, New Hampshire.
Samuel likes spaceships. He has his own voice, and he has the voice on the press button thing. Does he like sunflowers? I like sunflowers.
Now Samuel was headed off to Concord High. I had a good feeling about his freshman year. I knew Connolly was devoted to making the school a welcoming place for every kid. He embraced the hundreds of kids who came here as immigrants and refugees, whose families had resettled in Concord in recent years, English language learners from dozens of countries. He was proud that Concord was the first high school in the country to elect a transgender student as homecoming king. I had also heard that Gene was a strong believer in inclusive education, so I was hopeful that Samuel would continue to feel a sense of belonging at Concord High. But I had no idea that our family's stories were about to intersect in some very unexpected ways.
Have more time to answer questions and talk with you then. With that said, I want to turn it over to our wonderful building principal, Gene Connolly.
In the fall of Samuel's freshman year, I had my first opportunity to hear Principal Gene Connolly speak to parents. It was back to school night.
Back to school night is a wonderful tradition that we have here at Concord High School, and I'm glad that you're all part of it.
As Connolly began his speech, the parents in the audience exchanged uneasy glances. Mr. Connolly was slurring his words.
These improvements that the other administrators will talk about in a few minutes are based on the best research in the field of education and have been used by the majority of teachers for years.
Sophomore number 11, Slanton Samuel Habib.
About a year later, I went to one of Samuel's unified basketball games, where kids with and without disabilities compete on high school sports teams. At halftime, I watched Samuel have a conversation with Connolly, but neither spoke. Samuel and Connolly used hand gestures and communication devices. Samuel because of his cerebral palsy, Connolly because he had developed amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, also known as ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, and had lost his ability to speak.
How you doing? Okay, we're filming here for a little bit. Yeah. Thanks.
I approached Connolly about making a film to show how our community was responding to his ALS diagnosis. He agreed immediately. He thought making a documentary together could open up an honest conversation about ALS and what it felt like to become disabled. We invited every one of the 1,600 kids at Concord High School to think of a question they might have for him. He couldn't talk, but he didn't want to be silent about what was happening.
What was the first symptom of ALS that led you to believe that something was wrong with your body?
In the spring of 2014, my speech started slurring. I was feeling fine, so I didn't give it much thought. Later, people told me that I sounded like I had been drinking. After 3 months of seeing different specialists and a series of tests, I was diagnosed on July 21st.
Everybody ready?
What was your first reaction when you found out you had ALS?
I didn't know that much about the disease. I remember the doctor telling me to get all my papers in order. That is when it hit me that this disease was going to kill me. I was in shock. It was like being in a bad dream and I wanted to wake up. I remember leaving the doctor's office and my wife getting sick in the parking lot.
Over the next several hours, students kept stepping up with questions. Some were practical, others were hopeful, medical, reflective.
Has being diagnosed with ALS changed the way you see or view the school?
Absolutely. I look at every day as a gift. I know my time at Concord High is limited and I want to make every day count.
How did you get your job as principal?
I would like to think I paid my dues. I taught for 7 years, was an assistant principal for 5, and have been a principal for 23 years. Samuel, when I was your age, I never would have thought I would become a principal. To answer your question, there were individuals at certain times in my career who saw potential in me and encouraged me to accept new challenges.
Samuel is part of a club at Concord High School called CHS Live. The student-run station broadcasts to the entire school each morning. Every Friday in the fall, he delivers the New England Patriots report.
The New England Patriots are home against the Houston Texans this Saturday.
He says it's the best part of his school week. Connolly started CHS Live years ago, and it's one of his proudest accomplishments.
The goals are to make sure everyone hears the important announcements. The second part is to help build a sense of community and using humor to do that.
Our song of the day is going to be the theme song for the greatest sitcom ever, Seinfeld. Now back to Jerry.
The questions kept coming. More students were acknowledging their curiosity.
How does it feel to be able to think the same but your body not cooperate?
It is really weird losing the ability to move happens so slowly that you don't realize that it is going away until it's gone, and then you ask yourself, how did that happen?
Mr. Conley, what's your biggest fear?
Dying, leaving my family. I need to know that they are taken care of. I also think about life after death and how wonderful it would be to see my parents.
So, in what ways has your family helped with everything?
Right now, they do everything. There is very little I can do for myself. 18 months ago, I was going for 3-mile runs. Now I can dress myself, and I know in the next couple of months I will only become more dependent.
If you are in a gerrymandered district, you get no credit for working with the other side and trying to actually make something happen. You get credit for standing on the fringe and speaking. Those there doing what they think they need to do to get reelected. If you were on top ratings that would give Republican candidates the speed of life, make sure you know who's in the absolutely.
Yeah, we have one for Samuel at home too. Yeah.
It's true for the very, very, very stupid people on the left.
Now, I know, I mean, obviously, this has been hard on the whole family in many ways that I could never ever quantify. So, what would you tell, if you could tell something to other people who are just beginning this journey? Is there anything you could share with them to help that perspective?
I wish I could be positive. I wish I could be. Just be patient and love. Really, that's all. We're taping. Just be patient and love and value the time that you have. That would be the only thing. But you know, it is a disease that is going to take his life, and so that part it's hard to tell somebody that it's going to be all right or things get better. But just through every stage of it, embrace it and love him and try to get as much as you can every day.
Soon after being diagnosed, I realized that Patty had it worse than I do. When we were married 35 years ago, it wasn't supposed to end like this. We had started talking about retiring to Cape Cod and getting old together, living by the ocean. The reality is that cream is up in the air.
Shay, hair. You want to sit? You want to bring a jacket on?
Life is not for the faint of heart. It can be cruel and unfair. Living a fulfilling life can be challenging. Our job is to live our lives with purpose. No one can go it alone. You need the love of your family to give you the strength to deal with life's challenges.
See what you look like?
Nice. Oh my God, yeah, there's definitely a strong resemblance. No doubt, the smile.
The kids have been outrageously loving, and I think comes back from Gene. I mean, that's him, and it's reflected in the kids and their ability to come home and be with us and give back everything they have now.
Go ahead, go take him out. I think he wants to say goodbye to you. Oh, you want to say goodbye? Coffee. It's more important. I love you. Have a good day. All right. Thanks. I'll be right back. Thanks, Mom. Yep. Thank you, Robert.
As Samuel's father, I know how much work it is and how emotional it can be to provide care and support for a person with a significant disability. As Gene loses more and more of his physical abilities, his family has stepped into the role of caregiver.
It's kind of funny how it's all come back to him now that he is in this situation, and all these same people that he showed love and empathy and caring and all that for have all come back, and so many people have come by and done the same for him.
Well, good morning, sunshine. How are you? You got a ton here. Oh, you want to just leave it on then? Perfect.
I've worked in schools all my life, and there are some principals that just get overwhelmed with the paper and the work and that aspect of their building, and they sometimes overlook the kids. Everything that those kids did, he wanted to be a part of, whether it was the music or the plays or the sports. And that's why I think he has so much genuine love from the people at Concord High, because they felt his genuine love. Every time I would go into school, he would have to pull kids over. You have to meet this kid, and he'd tell me everything he could about that child.
Nice.
That's what kids feel, his real, genuine love for them.
Concord High is big, but it's also tight-knit. Because Gene had such a close connection with students, I was not surprised to see how compassionately they responded.
Honoring all of his hard work and dedication to CHS.
People throughout the community continued to seek out Gene's leadership and his voice.
So would you please give a warm welcome to the Concord High principal and inspiration to us all, Gene Conley.
I am going to qualify that I have lost the use of my vocal cords, but because of modern technology, I have a machine that allows me to speak while the voice is computer generated. The words are all mine, however. All of you are missing my Boston accent. Now that I have to type my words into a program, I am forever behind in conversations. Many times I will be typing frantically to say something brilliant, and by the time I finish typing it, I'll look at my message and I erase it because it really wasn't that insightful nor important.
What is it like to have all these thoughts and ideas in your head and not be able to vocalize them as well?
I choose what I am going to say more wisely. I filter out a lot of things I would have said in the past. I think it would be safe to say I am more efficient when communicating.
Students asked about pretty much everything.
Hey, Mr. Connolly. I really want to know what you do to manage your flawless hair. I think it's amazing.
Thank you. My wife or my daughter do my hair every morning. What would be fun if I came to school with my hair down? My hair is quite long.
Yes.
Do you prefer the Gibson Les Paul or Fender Strat?
Strat. My first guitar was a Squier Telecaster, a good entry-level guitar. My favorite song to play is Hit Me With Your Best Shot, popularized by Pat Benetter.
Gene is a huge rock and roll fan. Shortly after his diagnosis, he realized that his guitar playing days were limited, so he and some friends made the most of his last jam session. They took the stage at Concord's Capitol Center for the Arts to raise money for the Connolly Tough Fund, an effort by the Concord community to help Gene's family pay for the many uncovered expenses from the debilitating effects of ALS, like a wheelchair ramp for their home, an accessible van, and medical bills that insurance didn't cover.
8 years ago, I explained to my wife I was having a midlife crisis. I had just turned 50, and I was still in love with her, and I never really liked red sports cars. So I said, I want to take up a musical instrument. So she said, what would you like to play? And I said, the guitar. And she said, well, I'll get you one for your birthday, a nice acoustic guitar. And I said, oh, no, buddy. This isn't an electric guitar, this is a midlife crisis.
How does it feel knowing it could all end at any time? Do you feel satisfied? Do you feel like you did everything you wanted to do?
Tough question, Pat. I have had 18 months to get ready. Some people don't get any time. When they die suddenly, I am living a charmed life. I don't have any regrets worth mentioning.
What's one thing that gets you through the day to keep going and to keep fighting?
The love I feel from students and staff is like rocket fuel. I get a tremendous rush of energy from them.
It'd be hard to hop around though. Thank you.
Jean continued to take questions. Some students were just looking for a little bit of wisdom.
Do you have advice as to how to live your life to the fullest in the time that we have?
I have been asked this question a number of times. I have answered live in the moment, and that answer has struck a chord with a lot of folks.
Hi, Mr. Connolly. What is your greatest accomplishment?
Keeping the disease public. Around 5,000 people a year in our country get diagnosed with ALS. Statistically, that is a relatively small number, so the urgency to find a cure is less than other diseases. I have made my journey public in an effort to keep a spotlight on this disease.
Students asked even the very toughest questions.
Have you ever considered assisted suicide or euthanasia?
Wow, Sophie, that is a great question. To be 100% honest with you, I have thought about it. However, I am one of the world's all-time optimists, so I will want to hang on as long as I can because they might come up with a cure tomorrow.
My son Samuel has had a disability since birth. He has always been, and always will be, a person with a disability. And he's proud of that identity. People in the disability advocacy world sometimes use the term TEMPs to describe people without disabilities. It's short for temporarily abled. The implication is that even if you don't have a disability now, as you age, it's pretty likely that you'll acquire some sort of disability one day. During his 14 years at Concord High, Gene became increasingly convinced that everyone benefits when students without disabilities learn alongside students with disabilities. Now, he had become a person with a disability, and he was the one being included and embraced by the school. Gene was committed to remaining principal as long as he could do the job, and the school district supported him. But his ability to lead the school was getting more and more difficult every day.
Good morning, Concord High School. It is with a level of sadness that I announce that this school year will be my last. I have had 14 years as the principal of this outstanding school. As much as I still love my job, I know in my heart that physically I cannot continue after this June. Let's all agree to enjoy the rest of this school year and make it memorable. Thank you.
What are some of the emotions you're feeling now that you're leaving Concord High School?
I don't want to leave. I still have a lot left in my tank. It is a source of frustration because I know it is not fair to the school to stay any longer. Strangely, it is not my physical limitations that is causing me to leave. It is fatigue. When I leave school, I go home and go straight to bed. I need to sleep 13 to 14 hours a night, and when I get up in the morning, I am still tired.
Samuel and Jean both told me that they felt at home at Concord High, but my experience as Samuel's dad constantly reminds me that the stigma around disability is real. Samuel is included in general education classes, and he's on a path towards graduation and college. But when we are out and about in the world, it's common for people to talk to Samuel like he's a 4-year-old, which makes him furious. So as Gene packed up his office alongside his son Jim on one of his final days as principal, I asked him a question that had been on my mind since I started filming. Did people question his intelligence since he had lost his ability to speak and walk?
As my ALS symptoms have become more pronounced, I have noticed when people approach me, they speak to me differently. Physically, I have changed. My face is less expressive. I drool constantly. People don't understand the disease. They think the disease has affected my cognitive abilities. While I look different inside, I am the same person. It can be frustrating and exhausting. I have a newfound respect for people with disabilities.
I'm gonna unlock it.
He's unlocked.
All right, cool. Do you want me to leave this with you? Here, okay.
I got a lot of hairspray. I don't know about you. Yeah, he's got a lot of hairspray. I was really. I'm down below it.
Thank you so much. You're a hero.
What an amazing principal, an amazing man.
I'm going to leave. I'm not coming back next year either. So thank you. Thank you
Everyone
for
are
hiring
leaving
me.
me. You're leaving, he's leaving, and she, I'll be
The
alone.
chauffeur is here. So this is the last one for you? Graduation? Wow. These kids are gonna miss you.
It was a great piece of advice to put my little nerdy boy and put my mind at ease. And now look at him. So thank you. Thank you for everything.
What's the one most important lesson you hope all Concord High students will leave with once they graduate and carry with them for the rest of their lives?
Don't be afraid to tell someone that you love them. When I was in high school and college, it was the height of uncoolness to tell someone that you love them, and I followed the rules. Well, I am going to give you permission this afternoon to break the rule. The new rule is, if you love someone, you have to tell them.
Finally, we would like to recognize a very important member of the class of 2016. This person is one of the most caring, selfless, and devoted individuals that our class has ever met.
We are honoring this person by giving them their very own diploma to include them as a member of our class. I'm sure by now everyone has figured out that this person is our very own principal, Mr. Gene Conley.
You have shared this experience with me longer than any other class. The current freshmen and sophomores have never heard my voice. There are many lessons that we both learned from this experience. The one that I want to make sure that you take away is, you will face adversity. Life is full of challenges. We get little say in what happens to us, but everything to say in how we deal with it. In fact, our response will define us as an individual.
Is there anything you would do differently in your life knowing that you would later be diagnosed with ALS?
Great question, Izzy. Spend more time with my family. Getting sick has been a good reminder to me about what is really important and who really loves you. I would like to share my final quote with you. It comes from one of my
Oh no, the temperature's gone up. You can finish it? Please do. Please do. I apologize. It's overheated.
I'd like to share my final quote with you. It comes from one of my favorite books, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, and it's said by one of my favorite characters, Atticus Finch. I wanted you to see what real courage is. It's when you know you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway and see it through no matter what. You rarely win, but sometimes you do.
I wanted to say thank you first for being our principal, and you've made a really safe environment for us. I felt safe being here this 4 years, and I think you've put forth such an effort to get to know all the students. And I just wanted to ask, if someone wrote a memoir about your life, what would the last line be?
Gene Conley was first and foremost a good person.
I like it.
Sally Winona Freeman. Elijah Seymour Friedman.
I have learned a lot from Gene and Samuel. They have shown me that living with a disability isn't about being a role model or a hero. Gene and Samuel are about living their life fully and honestly and proudly. They are living their lives with purpose. As Gene has said,
say hello to everyone you see. Have courage. Think before you speak. Embrace gratitude. Tell the truth all the time. And family comes first.
I feel nervous and uncomfortable.
What?
I feel nervous and uncomfortable.
Don't worry, I think you'll fit right in. I know someone with the same exact outfit as you.
Ladies and gentlemen, your principal, Gene Connolly.
Wouldn't it be nice if we were older, then we wouldn't have to wait so long? And wouldn't it be nice to live together in the kind of world where we belong? No, it's gonna make it that much better when we can say goodnight and stay together.
All right, well, first of all, I just want to say it's an honor to bring this film to you and to bring Gene's story to you. So I'm so appreciative that the conference organizers really encouraged me to show this film today. I'll be sure to share some pictures with Gene and his family from today, and we'll put them up on social media and stuff. But I think that it's funny, Michael McSheen, my colleague, who some of you met yesterday, urged organizers to put tissues on all the tables. And I said, no, that would be really too manipulative. We can't do that. But maybe for future, this kind of happens at every screening. There's a lot of teary eyes. But I think, and I hope it's not pure sadness. It's just a lot of emotion welling up probably around your own experiences in schools, with people in your lives, maybe who've gone through similar journeys. And for just the beauty of Gene's passion and his commitment to creating a more inclusive world. It's just such a powerful, powerful example of what is possible with great leadership, and great humanity, great leadership and great humanity. And I've had the fortune of going to dozens and dozens of schools all over the country and filming and getting to know schools, particularly some of the most inclusive schools in the country. And the common denominator, I will tell you, at every school is great leadership. And sometimes it's the principal, sometimes it's the superintendent, sometimes the special ed director. A lot of different people can provide leadership. Classroom teachers, related service providers. I've seen it in paraprofessionals. I've seen provide great leadership. But that's a common denominator. And I've been to some very, very wealthy districts, and I've been to some very poor districts. And I had the chance to film for the SWIFT project that some of you may know about is working in Indiana. And I was in the Mississippi Delta, filming one of the poorest communities I've ever been in. Like $19,000 a year family median income, 100% African American, 100% free and reduced lunch. And they were doing inclusion so beautifully well. All the things you want to see, collaborative teaching, universal design for learning, differentiated instruction was happening in this community because of great leadership and great support from the SWIFT project, but also just great approach to their education. And then I've been in some really wealthy communities, and some of those communities say, oh, we just don't think we can afford to do inclusion. And I say, and I'm talking about like some really wealthy communities, and I'm thinking, let me talk to you about the Mississippi Delta and what they're doing there. And I finally came up with a great response to people who say they can't afford to do this. It's not about money. It's about leadership, it's about attitude, and it's about implementing effective practices in schools, which is what we're all here to talk about. So I'm going to shift gears for a minute now. In the last 25 minutes or so of the keynote, I'm going to show you a couple of short films. As I said, effective practices are important. And I also feel like it's important to not leave out any kids at all in this discussion around inclusion. And so, I did Including Samuel. I did Mr. Connolly Has ALS film. I'll show you a little bit from the Intelligent Lives film, which focuses on people with intellectual disabilities. But about 5 or 6 years ago, I found that I really want to do a film about students with emotional and behavioral disabilities. Because I'm sure many of you in the room would agree that oftentimes those are the kids that are getting segregated, suspended, expelled, having really awful outcomes after school, and the data supports that. There's about I think the graduation rate is about maybe 50% around, depending on the stat you look at for that disability around the country. Only about 35% of those kids are included in general education, and post outcomes are pretty awful when it comes to incarceration, drug abuse, teen pregnancy, et cetera. So anyway, I found a school in New Hampshire that was doing a couple things really, really well. They had a multi-tiered system of support in place, also called PBIS, or Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports, and they were doing great person-centered planning for students who are at risk of dropping out through a model called Renew, which was started by one of my colleagues, Joanne Malloy at UNH. So I want to show you just a 6-minute trailer of this film called Who Cares About Kelsey, because this was a student, Kelsey, that I filmed for 2 years, and who was certainly on a path towards the kind of outcomes we don't want to see for our kids: incarceration, drug abuse. Almost all her friends and immediate family members of her, her siblings had become pregnant as teenagers. And the school, through MTSS, through PBIS, and through person-centered planning, got her on a much different trajectory. So enjoy this 6-minute clip, and I'll show you how to access all this material online, or most of it. Mr. Connolly Has ALS is going to be broadcast nationally in the spring, but I hope to work, with the Resource Center to make the film perhaps available to you guys even sooner. But certainly by the spring, it's going to be available.
Freshman year, I came here. They didn't really know my situation. Sophomore year wasn't good. Second sophomore year wasn't good.
I got suspended for the intent of selling and possession of a controlled substance. They were gonna report me to the police, but they didn't because it was my own prescription.
I don't like taking my medicine.
It makes me not want to eat, not want to sleep. When you have ADHD, you suppress a lot of things, like thoughts and anger and energy, and then one day,
Shut up! We can have lots of dreams and hopes for you.
I want to be a police officer. I want a family. I want to be successful in life.
But you are the one that plays a critical role. What your vision, what your passion is, will determine whether or not you achieve those dreams.
When we lived in Georgia, my mom was always drunk or high or whatever.
I hate myself for my kids suffering, and I know it's affected Kelsey, and it's probably hurt her way of thinking.
When she was younger, I was constantly working, so there was a good chunk of my kids' lives where I wasn't around to follow through with what they were doing.
If you dwell on the bad things, you tend to think about it a lot. You get depressed, so that I just block it out completely.
All the work I did, I'm failing math now. I really don't care about graduating anymore.
By not asking for help, Kelsey.
How many classes is she passing?
2 out of 4. You're setting up your own roadblock.
Climb up the twisted road.
All right, so Kelsey, what's the agenda for today?
Graduating, why not?
Graduating.
If I don't graduate, I'm pretty sure I'm not coming to this school.
You're a very determined person, and you feel like, I've always taken care of me. I don't need anybody in my life to help me. There's going to be a time in your life, and this is right now, you might need more than just yourself to get through this.
I don't know how to do that.
What are you having trouble on?
32 plus 36 plus 35.
Awesome, great job.
Stare out a cold window. Close your eyes as the shadows grow. Maybe they'll leave you alone, but that's not how this story goes. Meet in a snowy field. Lower my sword as shield. Your wounds, they will never heal, and there's nothing left for you to steal. Then you'll understand
right, so that's just 5 minutes out of an hour-long film that obviously gets into a lot more depth. One of the things that Kelsey talked a lot about, she co-presented with me for about a year. We did 60 or 70 screenings together, and she's very candid about the fact that she also experienced sexual abuse as a kid, and obviously the trauma from that was a really major factor in her life, as well as the trauma of being in a household with a lot of violence and substance abuse. So she's doing really well. She's in her mid-20s now. She's got a full-time job. She's got a baby, but she had the baby at 23 and not 17. And I want to just let you know, I'm going to show you a film in a second now that is available on the website. So if you go to whocaresaboutKelsey.com and you go to the multimedia section, what we did as part of this project is we created all these free short films that can be accessed by anybody, and for professional development, for public awareness. The trailer I just showed is there. I'm about to show this film called Taja, but we also did a look at how the whole high school transformed itself through Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports, or MTSS. I did 6 interviews with incarcerated youth talking about what happened in their life when they were in elementary, middle, and high school that led them on this path, and what maybe could have made a difference in terms of schools or other people in their life. I did a film on a boy named Axel, who also is nonverbal, has autism, and how Michael actually, who's here at the conference, and others ramped up his communication supports, or Michael coached the school on ramping up communication supports so that Axel had a voice of sorts and was able to be successful in general education. I did a film around the issue of restraint and seclusion and interviewed people who had experienced that and the impact on them and on the family. So there's a lot of material here, as well as resources and discussion guides. So as I was doing Who Cares About Kelsey, I really was excited to not only tell this long, big, feature-length film, but I also wanted to show what does it really look like in a classroom where all these practices are coming together in a beautiful way. And so I do a lot of research before I start filming in a school to find the right situation. And I found, again, I was fortunate to find another school in New Hampshire, Maplewood Elementary, where again, through great leadership and great practices, they were doing such awesome work around collaborative teaching and universal design for learning, bringing communication technology into the classroom or making it accessible to students who needed it, differentiating their instruction. You'll see it. Better to see it than for me to tell it. So I want to show you, this is just a 13-minute film that's freely available. And it's one of my favorite films because I think this school just captures what it really looks like when you're a truly inclusive school. And also Taja is just awesome, as you'll see in a moment. So enjoy this film.
Tidak biasanya melakukan hal-hal.
When I first brought Tasha to school, I was a little nervous. I was worried because at home, Tasha didn't really do things like normal kids do. Sometimes she wouldn't listen to me, or sometimes she just screamed, or sometimes she just cries.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6.
I brought her to a doctor for the brain. He confirmed that this child does have autism.
We knew right off that she was incredibly motivated by music and musical instruments and doing things that way, so we wanted to keep developing like a whole box of tools of things that would keep her engaged, because she also has a very short attention span, so something that would engage her one day wouldn't necessarily the next. We wanted to teach her in a different way so that she wasn't running to the heater and banging on the heater or pulling the plugs out of the computers. So.
When I first met Tasha, she would have meltdowns sometimes just if schedules were off or if people were different or if she just didn't get her way. Where are we going? Are we going to finish the book? So we wanted to be able to be proactive about constantly trying to try different things to make sure that she is able to express what she wants or needs or feels to the best of her ability.
Thin, it was another very thin, easy to pour liquid. How many states of matter are there again? Three. There are 3 states of matter, and what are the...
When Tasha came to my class last year, she had a very basic, what we called a talk box, so a augmentative communication device. And it had like 5 basic pages of pre-programmed things, and she used it in structured settings that were the same all the time, so we could make calendar one of the pages that worked all the time. But we found that she was wanting to say and was more engaged than that device allowed.
And finally, last May, we were able to purchase, the district did, the Vantage Light for her to use. She is usually able to go through multiple steps to finding different things that she wants to say.
I am a snack.
You're a snack?
Nice job.
Anything else?
The team itself went to a lot of trainings on how to support her using it, and she became a lot more involved in the classroom that way, socially and academically. So we were able to make pages that connected to every lesson in the room instead of just the things that happened every day all the time, as well as social pages of asking questions and telling jokes. And we found that once she got that, there were joke pages on it, and during snack time, all of the kids would come over and they'd ask her to tell them a joke. They would ask if they could touch it too.
Can Caitlin try? Yes or no?
They wouldn't let us in.
Can Caitlin try? Yes or no?
I psycho. Your hands resting on my
Yes. Thank you.
Since Tasha has had her device, her behaviors have decreased. In the small amount of time that she's had the device, it's also really increased her verbal output. She is saying all kinds of different things.
Who is this?
I have a library and Friday.
You do. I think with this device and from the help of her teachers, she's learning more and more.
I go to Mrs. B.
You go to Mrs. B. With this, at home, she speaks sentences that she would never speak before.
Yeah. She, when I first started here at recess time and at lunchtime, would just kind of be by herself. But this year, she's really become very socially aware of what's going on in the class and wanting to be with her friends and sit by them and do what they're doing.
I've been out on the playground before for recess duty, and there'll be a student with autism or another disability that will walk by, and there are some kids who, without having those experiences, tend to shy away. But when I look out and I see students from my class out there, they're engaging with everyone, and they will go over and they'll want to play with Tasha. I feel like they take it and that's a life lesson for them, and that sometimes those lessons are better than what the Magic E does in a word.
I'm sleeping in school! Wake
We became part of the Positive Behavioral Interventions and Support System, PBIS, back when the state of New Hampshire first provided that as an opportunity. So we really looked at that as how we could provide a good, strong, universal basis. And then we have students who we may need a more intense program with. For those, we'll bring in quite a few staff people, possibly some people from the community who are involved in wraparound services, and look with them how we can support them through not only our own but area agencies. We want to make sure that the classroom teacher is the pivotal person. There are individual meetings each week so that the classroom teacher would come to the meeting so that the special education providers would have an idea of what the classroom teacher is working on, so that all of their lessons can be supportive of what the regular classroom is doing. Somersworth is not an affluent community. You know, we do not have a lot of economic resources. However, we feel like we are people rich. It's just been committed to that kind of an approach ever since we began working with students with significant disabilities. It's just who we are. Yeah.
I was happy to know that my kid, Tasha, will be in the same class as everyone else, because I thought it would give her the opportunity to look at other kids who are normal and do what they usually do. Instead of being in a classroom with just more kids with autism, then I would feel that she wouldn't really learn anything new.
If she wasn't in the classroom, she wouldn't be able to see what the other kids were doing to pick it up. She's very observant of what the other kids are doing. Some of the kids that she is in the classroom with now have been with her for a year or two, or have been with other students with different disabilities. So they're very open to helping out, and they're aware that they're modeling also.
We have to touch her. No, don't touch her, Bree. I'm not touching her. She's touching me, Edward. No.
My philosophy is that social growth and learning how to engage with everyone in the world is just as important as learning your academics. And I have just felt that the kids have so many rewarding experiences just learning to accept and to understand and to support people that are different.
Let's rotate paper.
We want her to be Tasha, and if Tasha is going to do her work at her desk or at a table or under the table or wherever, that's fine.
If you're not willing to differentiate your instruction for the wide range of learners that you have, including students with autism, then you're not in the right profession.
We're in front. Excuse us.
Yeah, she makes me a much better teacher. Patience is a virtue.
Where are you going? The piano, right here.
Everyone has strengths and weaknesses, and very often we learned things from Tasha that we wouldn't have learned had she not been in here. She amazed the class all the time.
Just want to let you know that we've never actually done this before, so we're kind of figuring it out as we go along. This is also a concert for to hear some special piano playing. So you're going to hear some solos on the piano. And she's playing one of our flutophone songs now. As a parent, I am worried about her, about how she will be and how she would be like socially, her development socially. Even if she still has autism, I think she can find happiness because I think she's a happy child. She's always expressing her feelings through music. Softly.
I've watched that film hundreds of times, and I never get tired of watching Taja. The only thing that's difficult for me is seeing the kids play the recorder. It brings back bad memories. I don't know about you guys. I try to play that thing. Anyway, in the very few minutes I have left, I just want to close by making sure you know about all the resources that are freely available to you online as for all my projects. So the Including SAML page has not only the trailer, but if you go into Inclusion Resources, we built a site where we put all the most cutting-edge resources we could find freely available for download or linking to those. So includingsaml.org has all that. I'm about to show you, in closing, a 2-minute trailer from the Intelligent Lives film. This is my new film that some of you saw last night. And the website for that has a 14-minute preview of the film, has some resources, and if you want to know about any of my work and where it's going to be broadcast or coming to your communities, if you, there's social media, but also if you just go to the subscribe to updates, we send out emails like once a month max. We don't sell the list or anything. It's just for this, updating you about where work's going to be available. So you can get emails that way. We have a really vibrant Intelligent Lives Facebook page that you can join. And frankly, I friend everybody on Facebook. As long as you're not a robot, I'll friend you. So feel free to connect that way as well. And then just in closing, I told you a little bit about this film, Intelligent Lies. I'm just gonna put up my, this for a second here. There's other ways to connect with me by email. I try and get back to everybody that emails me, so feel free to do that as well. But, so the whole idea behind Intelligent Lies was this notion that intelligence can be quantified in any way, I think is a very damaging history in our country. And if some of you may or may not know that the eugenics movement and other things that happened in the 1900s, mass institutionalization of people with intellectual disability, it's a part of our culture and history, just like slavery and segregation and all the horrible, pieces of our history, like many countries have difficult pieces in our history. So anyway, the film Intelligent Lives is an attempt to follow 3 path-breaking individuals, Micah, Nair, and Naomi, who are shattering the whole notion of that intelligence can be measured, and who are finding success in high school, in college, and in careers, even given the fact that they all have significant disabilities, intellectual autism, intellectual disabilities. So the film is also narrated by a well-known actor named Chris Cooper, who you'll probably recognize his face when you see it. And he and his wife, Marianne, also have a very powerful story to share. So I'd like to show you that 2-minute trailer in closing, and then we will break for lunch. And I'm looking forward to seeing many of you at the breakout. So let me just pull this up. It's 2 minutes long, and then we'll say a quick goodbye and break. So this is the trailer for Intelligent Lives.
Our son, Jesse, had cerebral palsy. When Jesse was 4, the neurologist told us that he would never be intellectually normal. We fought to have Jesse included in general education.
The IQ test measures a very limited potential of our brain to learn and misses all the other stuff.
Naomi, Micah, and Nair, 3 young adults with disabilities, unlocking their potential.
You happy with your tip you made?
Yeah.
You know what you're gonna buy with this?
Cell phone.
I'm getting a 9-degree certificate in disability studies.
Nair is not afraid to freely express himself.
Do you want to go to college?
Yeah.
When people say, why is your school successful? Because we include students with significant disabilities. We don't use IQ tests to inform us at all.
Not long ago, IQ testing was used to fuel a pseudoscience known as eugenics, which called for eliminating the menace of the feeble-minded. Institutions like Willowbrook more closely resembled prisons than schools.
We have to broaden our understanding of what intelligence is. I want my son to go into a world where he's looked at not there as a tall black guy who's acting weird.
Whether it's a police officer or a civilian, you do wonder what's going to happen.
I think because of Naomi's unconditional love for what she does, it's good for everyone.
Are you on Facebook?
No.
Okay.
My parents don't think that's safe.
What do you remember most about today?
Be ourselves.
Be ourselves.
Can any attempt to measure intelligence predict a person's value or ability to contribute meaningfully to the world?
Well, I learned a long time ago not to get between teachers and lunch, so I'm going to close with that. I'll just say once again, I really hope that you connect with me in whatever way is best for you on Facebook. We have a Mr. Conley Has ALS Facebook group as well. But most importantly, I hope you learned something this morning. I hope it was engaging, entertaining, whatever it did for you. I hope it was positive. And I'm really looking forward to meeting with you and talking with you throughout the next 2 days. Come and find me and let's chat. All right, thanks very much.